Mute.
Welcome, everybody,
Yeah, there we
to the
go.
Dev Talk Show here on a Monday, July 28th, 2025. Yeah, that was the whole feature that I don't like, where I tried to switch to this scene, but it had moved, it had changed the layout. I wish you could lock those. That would be kind of nice.
That would be nice.
I mean, I'm not sure how it would work, but I just know that that trips me up all the time. But anyways, it is the Dev Talk Show here. I'm Chris Gomez along with Rich Ross, and today I think we're going to dive into looking at some code that that you've been working on, Rich, that adds, I think, some of the feature functionality. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but some of the feature functionality to the application. But we're going to see, I think we're at least even be able to talk about and then work on things across the application, front end and back end. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, this will be a bit of a code review to kind of see some of the stuff that put together around. It was where we were heading when we did our session on Friday, where we wanted to get to, hey, let's get to the meeting. Let's make the kind of, it was a great integration that we did with some of the demo or the meetings and the components and stuff like that. But there are things that we know we wanted to do aside from just, create a meeting, right? We want to be able to go back and edit. We want to be able to click on one of those items and maybe see it in a larger screen. So those were some of the pieces that I started to work on and had a nice little coding session with my friend GitHub Copilot. And I probably should bring this. Well, this is that. Well, we could talk about going back and forth. I've been trying to work mostly in Visual Studio Code because it is one of the main reasons I'm doing it is because I really think the Copilot, GitHub Copilot, the way the interaction happens there and how it can update the code and all those things just seem to, for me, have been working better in VS Code. So that's what I've been sticking with. But the thing that I don't know how to do, and maybe it's something we can talk about, is once we, kind of show a few things, is I really like the test runner, the test results that you get when you're doing the test projects in Visual Studio, the full version. So haven't explored a lot for what's possible. I mean, you do get a little test result section there, but it really only happens when you run the test individually. So maybe something we can talk about as we go through here. So that's kind of where I'm thinking of starting. So probably the first thing we should do is really let's rebuild this one and show how it runs now, because it has changed a little bit.
I was just double checking that I know I've been looking away for people watching, but I was double checking that we were actually live on Twitch. I wasn't sure if we were.
Okay.
But in any case, all right. So are we ready to switch to your screen here, or at least to get that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let me do that.
Yeah, I've already started. I already kicked off a session. So we've got our .NET Aspire dashboard. Everything's running. Everything's green. It all looks good. I've got my little icon down here for my web page that's ready to go. One of the things we will have to do is figure out, do we really keep a home and what that looks like? But let's drill in a little deeper. And we've got meetings. Yes, and some of the meetings show up there, and you can see there. And there's some cool things here in that. Let's see, is it this? Yeah, so we actually have a nice little edit button that we can use, that we can essentially, once we save those meetings, we've got some place to go ahead and edit those. We'll come to that in a second. Even the add meeting works a little differently. So instead of being a section that kind of opens up on the page here, oh, are we still in debug somewhere? Let's
no, yeah, you've got a breakpoint sitting somewhere.
All right, we'll move on from that. I'm pretty confident this was working. I checked it in, so it must be working. So we actually get to a page here that is, I probably can zoom in a little bit. Yeah. So we've actually changed the web page that we're pointing to. So instead of being everything on the meetings, we actually have a quote unquote edit page that sits underneath it. And what that does is that takes us out to this page here, which has a full section of doing the meeting properties. Now, some of that has to, there's still some additional properties that we have to add here, but these were the ones that were kind of some of the important ones that, we knew we at least wanted to blanketly cover. So I can quickly, if I do that, cool, that's fine. Some text and then some location, TBD. We got our keywords in there. That's fine. We get all our properties here, so we can say, hey, this is, any one of those. I think we saw that last time. We could say it's going to be offline meeting. And then we can save that. And saving that meeting brings that item back up into here. Well, that wouldn't be the item because, that's interesting. We have to do something with maybe the option of sorting these meetings, right? Because they go from, which I guess kind of makes sense, oldest to newest, so that the one that's the one that's coming up next sits at the top.
There's definitely logic there, right? Where I agree that oldest to newest seems a little counterintuitive, but it's more of theoretically it would be the one coming up next. But now the logic changes a little bit because not that we have this represented in the code, but like that meeting's now in the past, right? So
right. And should that be different style, like a different CSS that gets applied to an older meeting? Or do we have a section that is past meetings and another section that is, the upcoming meetings? So we have all of those things to kind of work through still. Right. And a reminder, because we do have a few people watching, this is all open source. So I'd love to see, feel free to throw some suggestions about how those might need to be handled or taken care of. I know I'm trying to, there's a soft goal of getting this done by the end of August, which isn't that far away, given that it is the 1st of August come Friday. So because that part of that is selfish. Like there's some user group, some local user group meeting reasons for having another option for doing the meetings. That's one reason. The other reason is, quite honestly, I think there is .NET Preview 7 is happening in August, and then September and October is going to be the 2 release candidates for .NET Core or .NET 10, right? I think that's what we're calling it. So we want to be able to start looking at those and free up some time to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be here very soon. I mean, so and there's a lot in there that I think it would be nice to take a look at what's changed in the project templates, things like that. If there may be a lot of changes, there may not be any, or not any major ones. We'll find out.
Yep. And I think it's part of the reason why I'm trying to push some of the things that I'm doing off screen and just kind of coming back and sharing, well, this is kind of what we did.
Yeah.
Because it is tough in an hour to kind of get some scheduling done, or to get things like full features completed. So here we've got the edit meeting. So this is just basically clicking that event that we had. And if we do this, get rid of that. Yep, that's fine. So just changing the title on it. Let's see how that works. If I do update. Oh, why would that happen? Why would the meeting fail to update? We may want to take a look at that. So, because it did work.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you're live, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, because it could be anywhere along that thread. But what we should do is let's keep that in mind that failed. And what we want to do, or what I want to do, is look at some of the things that were put in place. Let's get rid of that. In addition to not only the functionality that was there, but actually took some of the, so that's our web project. It's fine, we can close that off. There is our test API project. And you can see there's a whole section here of green content, which is, some of the new tests that were created to kind of help support the work that were done around the way the meetings, changing the way the meetings function and the way the meetings go between pages, essentially. So that led to some changes in potentially how we might want to think about the uh, not only the service that we're using, but also the actual endpoints themselves. So having some tests in there to make those work. Some of those I started to comment out because I'll be honest, I looked at a meeting like this, which is create and retrieve a workflow. That might not be the one specifically. There were actually some use cases that were suggested. Well, hey, somebody goes to search for a meeting and they don't find the meeting. So instead of just saying, hey, we couldn't find it, we're going to go ahead and create it anyway. Well, that to me seemed not really a valid use case, because we wouldn't want someone to try and do an update on something that wasn't there. How did we get to the update state if it wasn't there to begin with? So that to me didn't seem like a valid test. So those were some of the things that I kind of commented out for now, and like we can use it and talk about those. But the idea being is that there were a number of endpoint tests for the meetings themselves. So I guess the thing we need to think about is, let's step through. Well, those are the tests. I think we need to step through the actual service for why we're not able to do an update on a meeting and why that just failed. Well, part of the reason it just failed is because it's going to throw an exception if something happens, but let's drill down a little bit. So an update meeting should be put as JSON async, which is fine. That takes us to that endpoint as a put. So if we go to
And I don't think we had this before. So
we didn't. Yeah, the
Right.
update was not there. So this is
Right.
some new functionality we added. And then we have here this section here, which is, I don't know what I did there. Let's get rid of that. Essentially this section here around the put. So we're taking in an ID, which is the ID of the object. Maybe that's, I could see that being potentially the thing that is not able to find it. So because all we're doing is basically passing on that that meeting object. Oh, ensure the meeting matches the.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose I don't know what happened in your specific case, but I could see, you could put anything you wanted in there.
Right.
And the question is should the API try to find it first, or let the repository figure that out? I guess it doesn't. I guess you could just make the decision like how you want it to work. I don't know that it's better one way or the other.
Right, because what's going to happen is if we go into this, right, and well, that's on the
It's okay. Yeah.
This one, Cosmo Meeting Repository, and we go down to our update meeting async, which is this method right here. We're basically going to do
it's an upsert,
the
right?
upsert. So it doesn't matter if it exists or not, it's going to wind up in the database. So does it make sense to have a check?
Well, I guess from a workflow standpoint, if you're calling, there's a couple differences here. If you're calling put on the API, is it the API's concern to decide whether or not to put the resource, or should the caller of that API first say, I'm like, if I'm the website and I say, okay, this person wants to edit, but for whatever reason, I've been tricked into trying to edit a nonsensical meeting, whose responsibility is it to take care of that?
Right.
And that's just something to think about, because I
Yeah,
think the
because it
way
could
the
go.
flow works right now,
Yeah,
the website isn't calling, well, unless there's a bug, the website isn't calling the put endpoint for something brand new. Well, for an ID that doesn't exist, or at least that it didn't think existed just a second earlier. I
right.
suppose theoretically, if one administrator deleted it and it really was no longer a resource, which I don't think is in our plans, right? That a delete would actually destroy it, but we'll see. And then someone else edited it, then it would, in some ways, it would resurrect it.
Yeah.
So,
We don't have anything that deletes at this point. We just have create and update.
right.
And then our plan is not really to do a hard delete, but to actually just change status.
Yeah.
So something could, our delete essentially is the logical delete of it being, canceled. Okay. So I think what we need to do is find out why, when we're in edit mode, it's not, because the create worked, why the edit mode is not updating the record, because it should be finding the record that it has. So what I think we need to do is, here's our HTTP client, here's our update. We just step through where we are here with this, because then it should take us to not only here, but also the update the meeting async. And then just in case our streams get crossed, we have a breakpoint there for that. All right, let's just run through that. Okay, got this. We got meetings. Let's go ahead and adjust the one here. Now, this one does have a item ID. So it should, if we go into Data Explorer, we do have a meeting ID that matches, right? That first one there is the same value. So there is a record in the database. So that's good. That's a good start. We hit edit, we get to here, and we can say, let's change that to last meeting and do an update, which has us land here. Where are we? We are in the service, because the website calls the service first. So let's walk through that. Boom. And it's going to try and make a call to the HTTP API endpoint. That's fine. Build up the stream. So now we call that endpoint, and let's see. So our meeting object has an ID, and that ID matches, right? That's the one that we're looking for. So that's the 9cc one. So that's good. Although, what's this? That's the same. Really shouldn't be doing this, because it looks like we're setting it.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it
don't
is
know
setting
why.
it.
Yeah. Instead of just checking to make sure it's equal. So we got to go back and fix that. So be that as it may, we do an update meeting. So we'll walk into that. And that should just do, right, that's the right meeting. That's fine. We could even go down and look at the title and see that it's got the changed verbiage there. So that should do what we need, which it seemed to do without issue. And we can check that by going over to essentially this item here, and you can see that it actually did change, right? So it's made, that change made it to the database there. Interesting. So if updated meeting, which is what we got back as a return object, if it equals that one, interesting. So maybe that's not the way to do this, because it looks like even though it is, even though those properties all look like they are the same, they're not equating to being the same with that if statement.
Yeah. And I think that's because, let's see, updated meeting and meeting are both meeting. They're both meeting reference types, and reference types they're not equality by value. So basically it's saying it's not the same object. Now, there's ways to deal with this. I would say, one of them is you don't necessarily implement equality, but you could implement comparable interface or something. Or, there's an interesting, would this work for us? Another way that I think a lot of people are working for this is they're switching to like records, because records do have structural equality. So in any case,
I think that, and I'm trying to think that there was a reason why we didn't go around the record path. I want it.
I think it might have had something to do with considering entity framework. But that I don't know if we really considered it that much. So, this is an interesting discussion, because put has some semantics that the audience may not be aware of, or frankly, a lot of APIs may not conform to. So let me know what you think about this, perhaps changing your thoughts on using the upsert in the implementation. Now that's different. I don't want to get too caught up in it, because all of these things are kind of facades in front of the other. If I'm calling the put API, I don't care what you're using behind it. I don't care if you are persisting this in Cosmos DB or SQL Server, or if you're sending a text message to somebody to write it down in a notebook. Like, that's not important to me. But put says that it's a request that the state of the resource is updated, but put doesn't define whether the caller can say that they want it created or replaced. It's that's just part of the definition. Now, a successful put may choose to return to you the representation of the resource in the request body. It might do that. It doesn't have to do that, but it can. However, if the put call results in a brand new resource, then the API, according to the HTTP RFC, says that you must return HTTP 201, not
as a created
200. Yeah. Now, you're not doing that here, or at least, this implementation isn't doing that here, but that's not, that wasn't by design. That was just because right now the implementation allows you to create one of these meetings, right? Through put. And I don't, here's the thing though, is I don't think, here's what I don't know. I'd have to go maybe do just a little research, is if put is obligated to create a resource if it doesn't exist. And I think the answer is no. I believe that as the API, or as the, because again, HTTP wasn't built with modern web APIs in mind specifically, but it does work because it's all about representing resources. What I'm wondering is, and I think you're allowed to do this, is let's just say I was a web server and you were trying to you were trying to create a new document. I think I'm allowed to say, no, I'm not accepting that document. And then I just have to basically respond with why. And it could just be that I don't accept new documents. That's not what I do. But, that's kind of like the semantics. It's kind of semantics between post and put, where post is a little bit more of like put is saying put a resource, and post is saying process this request, and it's a little bit more freeform. Like post can be like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to do this, or it's on Tuesdays I don't accept anything. Like,
Right.
But I'm not sure. It's interesting because I think what you're basically trying to do, which a lot of people do, is they're trying to use post for create and put for update.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty common thing. And there no, the web HTTP API police are not going to show up if the semantics aren't followed exactly.
Right.
The pros and cons to obeying the semantics is that theoretically it's less for you to document because somebody says like, well, how does this work? And let's say they can't even get a hold of you. But you follow common HTTP semantics and they don't need to get a hold of you.
Yeah.
But that assumes that a lot of people understand those.
Yeah. So, no, I think this is good discussion. So if we think about then what we have here of, the API taking a put request,
yep,
and being able to then call our repository, which is going to do the change to wherever that data is stored. In this case, it's the Cosmos one. And we go to update meeting. What we really shouldn't have here is not, see, you only get upsert as a choice. And there's nothing else that looks do I get any IntelliSense around that? Replace item async. Interesting.
Yeah, and so put requests are defined as replacing the state of the resource. And also, but I don't think that means that put has to. I mean, if for some reason the resource should not be created, it's okay to say that it's not created. I just think that what it might be is we might say that trying to update a resource that doesn't exist maybe results in a 404 resource isn't found.
I totally agree with you, but the way this function works, I've got no choice, right? Whatever I get, it's going to wind up in the database, whether it's new or it's updating an existing record. And I'm thinking that maybe if then we would have to on the back end say, did we, look and see if we found the record first, and if not, then when we return the API result, it has to be a created API versus just being an OK.
Well,
and I don't know that. So that's my thought around the put one, because we're in a space here, because I've only, or this upsert is the option. If we don't use upsert and we use something like replace, not container, replace the item.
That's what I was going to look up. So the Cosmos DP API, from what I can tell, but this is not the Cosmos DP API. This is an SDK.
Okay.
Here we go. And it's on container, right? So container dot replace item async is what you're looking at.
Yep.
Okay. So it says replaces an item in the Azure Cosmos DB Azure Cosmos service as an asynchronous operation.
Yeah.
What I was looking for was a remark that says what happens if it's not found. because let's say I drop out of the SDK and I go to just now the actual API. The API seems to support partial document update using JSON patch, or there's and then when you use JSON patch, there are operation types where you can say let's see, I'm trying to tell if basically it allows you to say replace, which it does not. I mean, it might. Anyways, I'm curious what happens here, and I was hoping the documentation would just tell me.
Yeah, but there's no, hey, on exam or on error or whatever, this is what you get. So then looking at this, though, this is patch as opposed to replace.
I don't know what you give it, though.
String, which is the ID, the partition key. I mean, obviously you have to give the object too, right? Because otherwise what are you patching?
Right.
If you can give it a collection of patch options, that's interesting. Sorry, of patch operations.
You can give, there's item request options for all of these, but it's actually, because I wondered if there was an operation where you basically could say, hey, don't add this. Upsert result, creation or replace can be identified by the status code 201 versus 200. This is in the Azure SDK. So clearly the Azure SDK.
Yeah.
So there is this blog post from 2015.
Okay.
Where this is the program manager Azure Stream. I don't know if this is what it was called then, and so
Stream
it's
Analytics is something different.
Yeah, it could have just been that this person just likes, it's just blogging about Cosmos DB and maybe isn't the program manager for it, which is fine. Okay. And again, it's 2015, so we're 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
So it used to be that in order to upsert, first you had to check that the document existed so that you could replace it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And apparently the upsert document allowed it to all become one line. I'm kind of curious what happens if you replace a document that doesn't exist. Using the replace API. I just don't know.
Yeah. So what if we did this? If we leave, well, that's the update meeting async, right? Let's go back to, because I'm feeling like replace is where we want to be.
Yeah.
At least that's my feeling of it. So what I'm going to do is, we don't need this for now. We might need something later on. We know we can't do this check because that just doesn't make sense. So if this
I
comes
think
back,
what the check will be. Well, let's see what happens, because what the check might be is the result
yeah,
of the update call.
of the actual update call here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So replace new item gives us a little bit. We've got to figure out, which what's going on here because we don't have everything. So we have the meeting of
Right.
type T, which is fine, and then it wants the string ID. So this should be meeting.id because that's and then the partition key. Let's go back. I could probably put that back in. Do that, and then this. So now we've got the partition key in there. Okay. Let's run it and see what happens. The cool thing is that we can just do, because what we want to do, I'm just going to run this, but what we want to do is probably hit that.
You figure instead of running the application, we could just call the API.
You got it. So let's do setup and running. It's not here. All right, let's go to our API section. That's the metadata one. Let's do this. So this is the meetings, but we're doing post.
Well, this is put.
Oh, sorry, you're right. Put.
Yeah.
Good catch. Localhost 7024. That's where our API is. And we should be passing in, when we do it, we pass in an ID, right? So that has to match. So if we pass in an ID of 73, and then probably need to supply, is that meeting? That is meeting. Okay. So type meeting. Right. We know that's not going to exist because all the meeting IDs are GUIDs, right? So that's going to fail.
Right.
But we do it. So this should get us what we need. Oh, I need a spacer. There we go. Now I can send a request. Save. And that should hit a breakpoint. Nope. Came back right away with a 400. Failed to read parameter meeting from the request body. Oh, no. Those are regular times. They're not Zulu times.
Well, if you have some in your emulator right now, which you may or may not have, right? I think you do.
Good call. Let's go to that.
Don't worry. After a little while, you'll get used to constructing these quickly.
There you go.
Or I'm sure there's a million converters online where you could just say, okay, give me the time right now in
paste. That's fine. Make it so it's later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see if that was the only issue. All right, what we got here.
So
we know it's going to head out to the repository.
Yeah.
And it's going to try to replace.
Warning. Cosmos exception.
Right.
An exception to type occurred but was not handled in the user code. Let's see what this exception says. Evaluation of get activity calls into native method, blah. Okay, that means that
So we didn't get a good answer.
No.
Wow, no inner exception or anything.
No. So it just basically blows up with the Cosmos exception.
Yeah, that seems weird.
It does. But it also seems like something. So even though the replaced item async doesn't say, hey, this is the exception that you should handle, we now know from this that we probably should handle that exception.
Well, yeah. Try the website real quick. I'm curious if this works. Well, first of all, I guess we got to blow through this. But I'm curious if it works at all, because we're trying to go straight for the error situation.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So we're going to hit that breakpoint here for us.
Right.
Looks like I missed it.
Yeah, there it is. It's fine. So, so that means replace item async is blowing up for us here.
Well, I mean, to be fair, right, we probably should. It's not here.
Now,
Right.
Okay, the item's partition key is immutable. To change an item's partition key, you must delete the original item and insert a new item. So I wonder.
You're talking about this part?
New partitioning key test.status.
I mean, that's what so when we do the create item, we need to include that.
Yeah. Right. No, I understand. I was just trying to figure out in their example call, they're doing exactly what you're doing, where they're saying the item, they're basically taking the item, in its, they're using a to-do activity, but it's really similar. And then the ID, and then they're sending in a new partition key and taking it straight out of the which I don't think is your issue. What I'm thinking is that replace item async. Yeah, it blows up, but I wish it would be more, or I wish maybe there was something we're missing in that stack trace that helps us understand that it's saying, hey, I didn't replace this because,
Yeah. So I agree with you. But I guess the question is how. I mean, we could certainly wrap this in a try catch and send back a null meeting if it blows up, basically, right? So that, and then we can interrogate the null meeting and know, well, I'm trying to get the API to a point to say, hey, this was okay, the replace happened, versus almost like I'm thinking we should be submitting a 404, this item's not found, because technically that's really what it is.
Yeah, that's right.
But that gets into implementation, right? Cosmos DB handles it that way versus SQL's going to might handle it differently, right?
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
you're right, is the different repositories would shield us from that.
yeah,
But in the end, our API, if a put to our API is a replace only, then we need to return 404 when it's not found.
right. Okay.
How we do that is, that's for us to figure out. But I think the API's responsibility is to say, unless an API can say that we're an upsert API, and when you put, we're going to create the resource if we can, and it's okay to say, no, we're not going to do that. So you're going to get a 404 instead.
Yeah, and I am just because SQL technically does an upsert now as well, but
There is
I don't
one,
know.
sure.
Yeah, but I mean that was not always the case. It was insert versus update. And you
Yeah,
had to kind of know
or
going in.
you might write a query or stored procedure that maybe handles that upsert for you back then.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, even now, I don't necessarily see a lot of implementation using merge in SQL Server either. The
Okay.
sort of SQL Server upsert. And I don't know if it's just because a lot of veterans are used to the way they always did things, or maybe they don't really like the method. I don't know. I'm not like, I know enough about SQL Server for us to use it and to even build applications, but it is not, my career to be the database developer.
True. So what I want to do here with this method is have it so there's two ways we could do this, right? We could basically say, oh, come on. Right? We could do a try catch and have it, and then if it blows up, return a null. But necessarily hitting an exception isn't always a very performant thing to do. So should we really do check if it exists, and then if it exists, do the replace? I'm leaning towards the latter, but I'm
and here's another thing that you might get from that. So this is interesting. The resource in Cosmos DB has an E tag, I believe.
It does, yes.
So let's just think through the workflow of you sit down at your desk and you're going to update one of these items, and you click the edit button, and then it takes some period of time for you to edit. Whether you get a phone call, you decide to go have dinner, you fall asleep, like who cares?
Right.
So then you go to update it, and I'm going to pick on a good friend of ours, but another person in the user group, Mel, he updated it.
Yeah.
Do you want the website, the web application, to say to you, hold on a second, there's been changes? So now we're thinking about an implementation, I think, where the website, I'm going to explain this with a very broad brush. Some of the support might be there for us already. Is when it goes to update the meeting, it knows the E tag of that resource. And then when it goes to put it, the put API says, wait a second, you gave me a meeting with a specific E tag that you want me to go update, but it has changed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, as an API, I'm going to return an entirely different status code. It would basically be, I'd have to go look it up, but it's for conflict.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I might be able to look it up now. I might not find it that quickly, but it's basically to say, hey, 409 conflict. So you would be saying that I'm not going to change this resource because your representation is inconsistent. And so you could say 409 conflict. And then what would happen is the website would say, oh, I tried to put this, but I got a conflict. So let me now show you the meeting has changed since you tried to update this. Do you want, and I've seen websites do this all the time, is they'll be like, do you want to bring up the original meeting? it would be really interesting, I think, to say, would it be, this is now really thinking ahead, is what if AI tried to help us merge what you did with what was updated? That might be an interesting use of AI to say, so the meeting has been updated, and would you like to see, would you like, or you could even just show it and say, like, I've updated the meeting, including yours, and feel free to change it if you want. But the idea would be to save you some time from going like, oh gosh, I don't know what Mel added and what I added. Are they compatible? Or are they not compatible? But the point is cool. That at the API level, this actually might be a use case where you do want to check if it exists, because you're also going to check that the item you're replacing has not changed since.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
But is that at the API level, or is that at the repository level?
Well, they're both going to tell us. Like, it turns out that the way Azure Cosmos DB NoSQL handles this, or can handle this, is because there's an E tag on every resource that you save.
Right.
If you're implementing it in SQL, well, now that implementation has to help you in some way, and which people, that can happen. You could do that. But so then the question is how does the repository interface handle that? Do you want that to be mandatory that any implementer must support this? Or do you kind of say like, well, that's not my job as the interface to figure that out. If the implementation supports it, it supports it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But you're right. It's almost like there is if you want to use exceptions, theoretically, you could use an exception to say,
right,
we're going to have an item changed exception. Or if we switch the API to like a more of a result pattern, then it would be a result error. And then the reason would be like the item changed. And, people have different preferences. Like some people try to avoid exceptions. There is a movement out there, I think, to avoid exceptions, use a result pattern. I think I see that in a lot of Nick Capsis's content. I see it especially in a lot of Amishal. Gosh, I can't remember his last name, but I should definitely remember it in his content, because he did a whole series on choosing like a result API, not a result API, but choosing a library that would help you implement a result type API. So, and I got to go find his YouTube channel now, but which I guess I won't do right now. But so that's, I think a lot of developers, at first glance, just reach for the exception, and that's okay. But certainly I feel like there's a couple things that this API is doing here. Is you can come in here, the meeting might not exist. How do you want to handle that?
Right.
You can come in here, the meeting might not exist, and the meeting might exist, and you go to change it. But by the time the representation that you've given the API, it's already changed. How do you want to handle that? And certainly it's not that exceptions can't be used. I would say that's the classic way to do it. But I know something that has been on my list to have a show dedicated to was trying to switch to a result pattern.
Yeah.
And that may be new to a lot of people. That's why I'd wanted to do it. So.
No, I think that'd be fun to do and make sure and kind of get ours to conform to that before we get too much further into what we've got here.
And the F# developers will love it too. So
there you go. Well, we've got one vote. I don't know if you saw that in the chat. We already have one vote.
Yeah, we did get a comment that says preferring the result pattern. And I think there's reasons why. The reasons why that you come to that is, number one, exceptions. If I can go to the performance thing, exceptions are expensive.
Yeah.
depending on how big your website is and how much it's processing, it could end up being negligible to your overall thing. The other thing that I think bothers me a little bit more is exceptions are go-tos, in that what happens next, who knows? I mean, you have a limited capability to try to influence that with try finally, but then again, you're under no obligation to try code as a developer. Like, there's nothing in the language that makes you try code. That's not true if you're in Java, but in C#, there's nothing that forces you to try code. And so it's almost like it's begging for hard to use code, because I don't know, the caller might try, they might catch. What do they do when they catch? I don't know. They could do whatever they want. They might not catch at all. They might just try finally, which is a good pattern, to try finally. But so in any case, that's not what's super important. What's important here, and you're kind of capturing it in the comments, is that it probably makes sense to come in here, check if it exists. If it doesn't, we can get out of here very quickly with a not found. Although this is actually the repository. So what does the repository return? Is it returning null? Should it be, this is where a result pattern comes in, where it's like, well, is this a result error not found type result? And then the next one is result error item change type result. And I get it if you're sitting there watching either now or in the future and saying, well, how is that any different from an exception? And the answer that I would give is because you controlled the flow of the code. You decided to return. The exception just didn't go poof and I'm gone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. So we could, you could, yes, I think that, the way they're doing it here of saying, hey, return null, and we hit an exception. Okay, that certainly can work, but maybe we can be a little bit more intelligent about doing it here and just checking, is it null? And then going and then hitting it that way. Now I'm wondering if did that maybe. I'm wondering why we wound up in that scenario, but maybe we don't. Okay, never mind.
I think because with get meeting, we were testing in the HTTP file and just throwing random numbers at it, and we said like, well, it shouldn't blow up. It should say not found.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, I know that we're going to get to the point where the callers to the API will be authenticated, but it might be, although I don't think we're going to do this, you could imagine an API that's authenticated for certain aspects of it, but that you would leave it quote unquote open for the public to call, because maybe you might be the type of API that says, hey, I don't care if other people benefit from this data. In fact, I would love for other people to spread this data around. So I'm going to have this anonymous, but changing the data is not anonymous. Or I know we're talking about MCP, so there's issues with that. Like, how is that going to access it? And in the end, it's probably just good practice to say, even though I'm writing the application that should be the only application that calls this, well, this is the internet and this is APIs that are hosted publicly. And there are people out there who will just scan a port and say, oh, look, there's a HTTP API waiting. I wonder what it does. And especially if you deploy your app as a SPA, you're almost inviting that, because your SPA is going to be making calls to APIs, and somebody crafty is going to say, I wonder what it's doing. And they'll look and they'll go, I wonder if that API is protected or not. Can I just call it? I mean,
right.
People get curious. I'll admit that sometimes in the past, I've been that person to be curious. I'm less than I am. I might be curious what an API is doing, but I'm less apt to go and tinker with it, because it's not necessarily the most ethical thing to do.
True.
So
what we did here on the repository side is basically said, hey, we're gonna do a check and then, or see if we can get the record. If we get the record, check and see if it is null or not. If it's not null, then we go ahead and do all of this here, which is our replace anyway, and then return a valid response that, hey, here's the thing that got replaced. If we fall through all of that, then we get to, hey, we're just going to return null. So what should then happen is back on our meeting endpoint, which is where we're going out and calling that, we need to check. And I'm not sure how to switch this, but if kind of shows up, but the one I want is the second one, because when I tab there, then I get the full implementation of. So I'm not sure how to switch that. That's something I've got to look into. So again, not equal to null. Then we're just going to go ahead and take this and move this up. Else, if we get down to here, plan is to return okay. So we're just going to, why are you complaining? Oh. Why are you complaining? Invalid expression term. Oh, down here. Sorry. There we go.
So Ellen asks, using the exclamation equals versus is not.
Mm.
It might just be habit. I'm
habit,
not
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is more human readable to go that is not.
I think the null comparison. I'm trying to remember. Believe me, I have probably read through and then forgotten, but I do tend to type is not null, and I'm trying to remember if there's a reason I switched to it, and then I just let it be muscle memory, and I've forgotten. So,
yeah, because I mean, I suppose that you could also do, I mean, not the negative, but this is the positive part. But this also works this would work if you're doing the positive, and then this would work if you're doing the negative. And I guess in my mind it was, well, this is it's not null, but then it's just that if it is null. So that it was just the shortness of it and the ease of being able to switch, or how I would switch between the two, as it were. So at least that's how I always thought of it.
I think there is a video that I have to go find that talks about the differences.
Okay.
Just to put that out there, it's not a big deal. Not for right now anywhere, but I appreciate that, we get a ton of great language and feature help from Alan all the time. So I'm very happy that you bring things up. Believe me, we're not asking you to stop. That's for sure. There's a couple of things we didn't look at today so much. Like we saw the implementation on the website. I don't think you got to go over how you made changes to the components.
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
How are you doing time-wise?
Well, I probably do have to wrap. And then the other thing that I am not an expert at, but this is another good, interesting thing to think through, is you mentioned at the very top about, you're in VS Code. And, this came up in C# Fritz and Jeff Fritz's .NET Aspire workshop, which it was a 6 to 7, I might have even been 8 full hours of time. So the fact that I happened to catch this bit is remarkable. But somebody did ask on there, hey, I'm seeing more and more demos with VS Code. Is this a changing of the guard from Visual Studio? And, Jeff had his answer. And for me, part of my answer is just that, and I'm not sure if this is what you're thinking as well. Well, you actually did mention that you thought the Copilot support was just a little bit better right now, or you just prefer it. I know they just added agent mode to Visual Studio IDE, but that doesn't mean that you've tried it or like it or whatever. But one answer that I do have for that, which is why I am intrigued to work with it more, is it makes this accessible to folks who aren't in Windows. If somebody walked in here and they were genuinely interested, whether it was this show or another show, and you see somebody working in Visual Studio, I could definitely see the impetus to be like, oh, maybe .NET's not really for me, right? I don't.
Right.
I have a Mac, and even though I know, even if you, I'm not saying you're uninformed, you could be like, yeah, I know, I could use this other way to do it, but that's not what I'm seeing here. So I'm gonna move on. Where Visual Studio Code is like, well, everybody can join in, and then I suppose if you want to move off to a different IDE, that's totally up to you.
Right.
But I think the little beaker on the left is like the test explorer, I think, and I think it's part of C# Dev Kit. I don't know how good this is. I don't know how good this is, but when I say that, I've just never tried it. But C# Dev Kit does have this. I just remember you mentioning, so it might be something that you try out. And yeah, exactly. Like there's other IDEs, right? There's other IDEs. So like if you watch Nick is going to be in Writer. And sometimes I'll be in Visual Studio, and it's mostly just, a lot of it is just to try and show different things. But in any case, I'm very curious now about how the Azure Cosmos SDK that we're using responds in these scenarios. I don't know if it's something we're doing per se. Like, I'm not quite ready to write it off, but I would like for what it returns to be a little bit more digestible. When you go look at the documentation for Cosmos DB, if you look in the API documentation, it is more digestible, because they'll say, okay, if you try to put and the item doesn't exist, but you use this particular mode, then we're going to tell you 404. And so I'm like, okay, how's the SDK wrapping this in a way that instead of telling us, it just blew up? So I'm not sure. I'm just not sure.
Okay. So what you're saying is the difference between what we saw in Learn, which is the .NET Azure SDK, that there's the API off of the Cosmos resources.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. If you go find the documentation that's on Cosmos DB for NoSQL, that is agnostic. That doesn't stick to C#, because at its heart, this is a web-based API that you interact with. And you might be in Node, you might be using a different SDK, because I know there's Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL SDKs of all kinds. There isn't just the .NET one.
Right. So
I just found that interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So there's two. There's a REST one for data, so integrating with the data, but then the management side of it. The
management, right? Yeah.
Yep. So you've got that flexibility, or that two different API layers, which is great, because you can probably have securities. You want to have different securities across those two different planes there.
Right.
So cool.
All right.
So we did a lot.
Yeah, and it still felt like, okay, so we found something to continue looking at. I know.
The good news is, the good news is that we were able to get the implementation so that it does a check first, and if it's not there, it's going to throw back and not found. That still seemed to, we'll have to check the test, because we did create a bunch of tests and see if they all run now that we've done some of that changing between the repository and the API. So
yeah, I mean, the general flow is working. We definitely know that we don't want just anybody to edit, so authentication is becoming more important. And then, there's a lot of stuff to explore that would be really nice. But I agree that, like you said, we have a little bit of a time frame that we'd like to start using it, but that doesn't mean we can't continue working on targeted things. Like, for example, I'd really like to look at something like BUnit for component testing, which I've never done. I know about BUnit. I've played with it, like, that whole sandbox, let me just try it out. But using it in an actual application, I think that's when you really learn. So
yeah, definitely.
All right.
That's why we're doing it. So
yep. So I got to get moving, especially. Thanks for walking us through this, Rich. And let's see. We do think that we might have a couple more shows this week. So stay tuned. But I know for sure I'm not available tomorrow, but so it could be Wednesday. So
Wednesday's looking good. Yeah.
Let me just stick with that for now. I wish it could be more definitive, but unfortunately we just not really at that point. So, all right, everybody. We will let you out of here. Thank you for joining us, whether you watched us now or watched us in the future on YouTube, youtube.com/The Dev Talk Show. And for Rich, I'm Chris, and we'll see you next time on The Dev Talk Show. I need to run. I'll see you.
Oh, cool. Thanks, man. We'll
Okay.
talk soon.
Yep.
Bye.